The wind howled like a wounded animal, tearing through the dense pines of the Rocky Mountains. Ethan sat by the fireplace in his small, secluded cabin, the flames casting flickering shadows on the wooden walls. He had chosen this life of isolation after the tragedy that had shattered his faith and his family. The storm outside was one of the worst he had seen in years, and the electricity had gone out hours ago. The only sounds were the crackling fire and the relentless pounding of rain on the roof. Ethan was lost in thought, staring at the flames, when a loud knock echoed through the cabin. He froze. No one came out here, especially not in a storm like this. The knock came again, more urgent this time. Reluctantly he stood, grabbed a flashlight, and made his way to the door. When he opened it, the wind nearly ripped the door from his hands. Standing there, drenched and shivering, was a young woman. Her dark hair clung to her face, and her clothes were soaked through. She looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes.
Please, they're after me. You have to help me.
Ethan hesitated. He had left the world behind for a reason, and this woman, whoever she was a reminder of everything he had tried to escape. But the fear in her eyes was real, and he couldn't turn her away.
Come in.
She stumbled into the cabin, and Ethan quickly shut the door against the storm. He handed her a blanket and gestured toward the fire. She wrapped herself in the blanket and sat down, her hands trembling as she held them out to the flames.
Who's after you?
She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperation.
I'm Lila. I'm a journalist. I was investigating a cult. They call themselves the Shadow. They did something to me. I don't know how to explain it, but they're not just people. There's something evil about them.
Ethan frowned. Cults were not uncommon in the remote areas of the Rockies, but something about her story felt off.
What do you mean? They did something to you?
Lila hesitated, then pulled up the sleeve of her jacket. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Her arm was covered in strange, blackened marks that seemed to pulse faintly, like veins of darkness spreading beneath her skin.
I don't know what it is, but it's getting worse. And they're coming for me, I can feel it.
Ethan stared at the marks, a cold knot forming in his stomach. He had seen enough in his years as a pastor to know that evil existed in the world, but this was something else entirely. Before he could respond, a loud crash came from outside, like something heavy hitting the ground. Lila's eyes widened in terror.
They're here.
Ethan grabbed a hunting rifle from the wall and moved to the window. Peering through the rain-streaked glass, he saw nothing but darkness and the swaying trees. But then, a flash of lightning illuminated the clearing in front of the cabin, and his blood ran cold. Standing there, unmoving, was a figure cloaked in black. Its face was hidden, but Ethan could feel its gaze piercing through the storm directly at him. Ethan stared out the window, his grip tightening on the rifle. The figure in the clearing was gone, swallowed by the darkness and the storm. But the feeling of being watched lingered, like a cold hand on the back of his neck. He turned to Lila, who was still sitting by the fire, her eyes wide with fear.
Stay here. I need to check outside.
No, you can't go out there. They'll kill you. Or worse.
Ethan hesitated, torn between his instinct to protect and the growing unease in his gut.
If they're out there, I need to know. I can't just sit here and wait for them to break in.
He grabbed a raincoat from a hook by the door and slipped it on, then stepped out into the storm. The wind and rain immediately assaulted him, but he pressed forward, flashlight in one hand and rifle in the other. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and mud. The storm drowned out any other sounds, making it impossible to hear if anyone or anything was nearby. Ethan circled the cabin, his senses on high alert. The forest felt alive, the trees swaying and groaning under the force of the wind. He reached the edge of the clearing and paused, shining the light into the trees. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, a shadow darting between the trunks, but it was gone before he could be sure.
Who's out there?
He called, his voice barely carrying over the storm. There was no response, only the relentless howl of the wind. He returned to the cabin, soaked and uneasy. Lila was exactly where he had left her, her eyes fixed on the door as if expecting something to burst through at any moment.
Did you see them?
No, but that doesn't mean they're not out there.
He set the rifle down and sat across from her, studying her face.
Leela, you need to tell me everything. Who are these people? What do they want with you?
She took a deep breath, her hands clutching the blanket tightly.
I told you they're a cult. They call themselves the Shadow. I was investigating them for a story. They operate in secret out in the wilderness. They ... They perform rituals. Dark rituals. I thought it was just superstition, but then I saw what they could do. They marked me, Ethan. They said I would belong to them no matter where I ran.
What kind of rituals? What did you see?
Lila hesitated, then pulled the blanket aside to reveal the blackened marks on her arm. They seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive.
They did this to me. They said it was a curse, that it would bind me to them. And now I can feel it. It's like something is inside me, watching, waiting.
We need to get you to a hospital, or the police. Someone who can help.
No, they'll find me. They have people everywhere. And the police, they won't believe me. They'll think I'm crazy.
Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. He didn't know what to believe, but he couldn't deny the fear in her eyes, or the strange marks on her arm.
All right, we'll figure this out. But for now, you need to rest. You're safe here.
Lila nodded, though she didn't look convinced. She curled up on the couch, pulling the blanket tightly around her. Ethan sat by the fire, keeping watch. The storm continued to rage outside, but the cabin felt like a fragile sanctuary, a small island of light in a sea of darkness. Hours passed, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. Ethan's thoughts raced as he tried to make sense of everything. He had left his old life behind to escape the darkness he had seen in the world, but now it had found him again. And this time, it wasn't just a metaphor. Suddenly, Lila sat up, her eyes wide with terror.
Do you hear that?
Ethan listened. At first, there was only the sound of the storm, but then faintly he heard it, a low, guttural chanting coming from outside. It was barely audible over the wind, but it was unmistakable.
They're here.
Ethan grabbed the rifle and moved to the window. The chanting grew louder, more insistent. He peered out into the darkness, but the storm made it impossible to see anything. Then a flash of lightning illuminated the clearing, and his blood ran cold. Standing in a circle around the cabin were figures cloaked in black, their faces hidden. They chanted in unison, their voices rising and falling in a rhythm that sent chills down Ethan's spine. In the center of the circle was the figure he had seen earlier, its head bowed, its arms raised to the sky. Ethan turned to Lila, his heart pounding.
We need to get out of here, now.
Ethan grabbed Lila's arm, pulling her to her feet.
We need to move. There's a back door we can slip out and head for the woods.
Lila's eyes were wide with panic, but she nodded, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. The chanting outside grew louder, more frenzied, as if the cultists knew their prey was about to escape. Ethan led her to the small back door near the kitchen, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He paused, listening for any signs of movement outside. But the storm drowned out everything except the relentless chanting.
Stay close to me.
The rain immediately soaked them as they stepped outside, the wind whipping through the trees. Ethan kept low, moving quickly toward the tree line. The forest was dense, and the darkness made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. But Ethan knew these woods. He had spent years exploring them, finding solace in their isolation. Now, they were his only hope of escape. Behind them, the chanting reached a crescendo, and a sudden unnatural silence fell over the clearing. Ethan glanced back, his heart pounding. The cabin was still visible through the trees, its windows glowing faintly from the firelight. But something was wrong. The figures in black were no longer standing in a circle. They were moving, spreading out, searching.
They're coming.
Keep moving. We need to get as far away as possible.
They pushed deeper into the forest, the rain and wind masking their movements, but the sense of being hunted was overwhelming. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made Ethan's heart skip a beat. He kept glancing over his shoulder, expecting to see the cloaked figures closing in. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small, hidden trail that Ethan had used in the past. It led to an old hunting cabin, abandoned and forgotten. It wasn't much, but it would give them a place to regroup and figure out their next move.
We're almost there.
But as they approached the trail, Leela suddenly stopped, her eyes wide with terror.
Ethan, look!
He turned, following her gaze. Standing in the middle of the trail, blocking their path, was one of the cloaked figures. Its face was hidden, but Ethan could feel its gaze piercing through the darkness. It raised a hand, and the air around them seemed to grow colder, the rain turning to icy needles against their skin.
Run!
Ethan shouted, pushing Lila ahead of him. They veered off the trail, crashing through the underbrush. The figure didn't follow, but Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before the others caught up. His mind raced as he tried to think of a plan. They couldn't keep running forever. They needed to find a way to fight back. Finally, they reached the old hunting cabin. It was small and dilapidated, but it would have to do. Ethan kicked the door open, ushering Lila inside. He barricaded the door with a heavy wooden table, then turned to her.
We need to figure out what we're dealing with. You said they marked you. What does that mean? What are they capable of?
Layla sank to the floor, her breathing ragged.
I don't know everything, but I saw things I can't explain. They summoned something, a shadow, a presence. It was like it was alive. And now it's inside me, Ethan. I can feel it.
Ethan knelt beside her, his mind racing. He had spent years studying theology, trying to understand the nature of good and evil. But this was beyond anything he had ever encountered.
If this is some kind of curse, there has to be a way to break it. We just need to figure out how.
Lila looked up at him, her eyes filled with desperation.
I don't know if we can. They're too powerful, and they won't stop until they have me.
We're not giving up, not yet. You said they marked you, maybe that's the key. If we can remove the mark, we can break their hold on you.
But how?
There has to be something in their rituals, something we can use against them. Think, Layla. What did you see? What did they do?
She closed her eyes, trying to recall the details.
They used symbols, drawn in blood, and they chanted in a language I didn't understand. But there was one thing, a book. They had a book, ancient and covered in strange symbols. They called it the Shadow's Tome.
That's it. If we can get that book, we might be able to reverse the curse. Do you know where it is?
No, but they keep it close. It's their most sacred object.
Ethan nodded, a plan forming in his mind.
Then we'll have to draw them out. Make them bring it to us.
Leela looked at him, fear and hope warring in her eyes.
How?
Ethan glanced out the window, into the storm.
We'll use the one thing they want most. You.
The storm outside the hunting cabin showed no signs of abating, its relentless fury mirroring the chaos in Ethan's mind. He stood by the window, staring into the darkness, his thoughts racing. Lila sat on the floor behind him, her knees drawn to her chest, her eyes fixed on the flickering fire. The tension between them was palpable, a mix of fear, determination, and something else, something neither of them dared to name. Ethan turned to her, his voice steady but soft.
We need to draw them out. If they want you so badly, we'll use that to our advantage.
How? They're not just going to walk into a trap. We'll make them think they've won. You'll be the bait, but I'll be right there with you. We'll lure them into the open, and when they bring the book, we'll take it. What if it doesn't work? What if they?
I won't let anything happen to you. I promise.
Their eyes met, and for a moment the storm outside seemed to fade away. Lila's fear softened, replaced by a flicker of trust. She nodded slowly.
Okay, I trust you.
Ethan's hand lingered on her shoulder for a moment longer than necessary before he stood, breaking the connection.
We need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the more time they have to find us.
He began gathering supplies, a flashlight, a knife, and a length of rope, while Lila watched him, her thoughts a whirlwind. She had been alone for so long, running from the cult, from the shadow that haunted her. But now, for the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone. Ethan's presence was a lifeline, and though she barely knew him, she found herself drawn to his strength, his calm determination.
Ethan, why are you doing this? You don't even know me.
He paused, his back to her, and for a moment he didn't answer. Then he turned, his expression unreadable.
Because it's the right thing to do, and because I've seen enough darkness in this world. If I can stop it, even just a little, I will.
Lila's heart ached at his words. She could see the pain in his eyes, the weight of whatever he had been through. It made her want to reach out to him, to offer some kind of comfort, but she didn't know how. Instead, she stood, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders.
Thank you for not giving up on me.
Ethan nodded, his gaze softening for just a moment before he turned back to the task at hand.
We should go. The storm will cover our movements, but we need to be careful.
They stepped out into the rain, the cold immediately seeping into their bones. Ethan led the way, his rifle at the ready, while Lila followed close behind. The forest was alive with the sound of the storm, the trees swaying and groaning under the force of the wind. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a potential threat. As they walked, Lila found herself glancing at Ethan more often than she meant to. There was something about the way he carried himself, the way he seemed to take charge without hesitation, that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't in a long time. She couldn't help but wonder what had driven him to this life of isolation, what pain he was hiding behind that stoic exterior. For his part, Ethan was acutely aware of Lila's presence beside him. He had spent years alone, shutting himself off from the world, but now, with her so close, he felt something stirring within him, something he had thought long buried. He pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the task at hand, but it lingered, a quiet undercurrent beneath his thoughts. They reached a small clearing, and Ethan stopped, turning to her.
This is where we'll make our stand. When they come, I'll be hidden nearby. You need to stay calm, no matter what happens. Can you do that?
Lila nodded, though her heart was pounding.
Okay, I'll try.
You're stronger than you think. I can see it in you.
The touch was fleeting, but it sent a jolt through both of them. Lila's breath caught, and for a moment she forgot about the storm, the cult, the shadow that haunted her. All she could think about was the warmth of his hand, the way his eyes seemed to see right through her. Ethan quickly pulled away, his expression unreadable once more.
Stay here. I'll be close.
He disappeared into the trees, leaving Lila alone in the clearing. The rain continued to fall, the wind howling around her, but she felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't alone, and that made all the difference. Lila stood in the center of the clearing, her heart pounding in her chest. The rain soaked through her clothes, and the wind chilled her to the bone, but she forced herself to stay still. Ethan's words echoed in her mind.
Stay calm no matter what happens.
She trusted him, but the fear was overwhelming. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound made her jump. Hidden among the trees, Ethan watched her closely, his rifle ready. He had positioned himself just far enough to remain unseen, but close enough to intervene if things went wrong. His eyes never left Lila, and though his expression was calm, his mind raced. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not now, not with her life on the line. Minutes passed, feeling like hours. The storm continued to rage, the rain and wind masking any sounds of approach. Then suddenly, the chanting began. It started softly, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder, more insistent. Lila's breath quickened, her eyes darting around the clearing. She couldn't see them, but she could feel their presence, cold, oppressive, and closing in. From the shadows, the cloaked figures emerged, their black robes blending seamlessly with the darkness. They moved in unison, forming a circle around Lila, their chanting growing louder and more frenzied. In the center of the circle, the tall figure from before stepped forward, its face still hidden, its arms raised to the sky. Lila's legs trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall. She could feel the mark on her arm pulsing, as if responding to the cultist's presence. The tall figure spoke, its voice deep and guttural, echoing unnaturally through the clearing.
You cannot escape us. You belong to the shadow.
I don't belong to anyone.
You carry our mark. Your soul is ours.
Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle. He waited for the right moment, his eyes scanning the scene. The tall figure reached into its robes and pulled out an ancient leather-bound book, The Shadow's Tome. The sight of it sent a chill down Ethan's spine, but he forced himself to stay focused. This was their chance. As the figure began to chant from the book, Ethan moved. He stepped out from the trees, his rifle aimed at the tall figure.
Step away from her.
The cultists turned as one, their chanting faltering. The tall figure lowered the book, its hidden gaze shifting to Ethan.
You are a fool to interfere. This does not concern you.
Ethan's finger hovered over the trigger.
It does now.
The figure laughed, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down Lila's spine.
You cannot stop us. The shadow is eternal.
Ethan's eyes flicked to Lila, who stood frozen in the center of the circle. Her eyes met his, and in that moment he saw not just fear, but trust. She believed in him, and that gave him the strength to act.
Lila, run!
He shouted, firing a shot into the air. The sound of the gunshot shattered the tension, and chaos erupted. Lila bolted, breaking through the circle of cultists as they scrambled to react. Ethan fired again, this time aiming at the tall figure. The bullet struck the book, sending it flying from the figure's hands. The tall figure let out a roar of anger, its form seeming to shift and distort in the dim light. The other cultists surged forward, but Ethan was ready. He fired again and again, forcing them back, buying Lila time to escape. Lila ran blindly through the forest, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the sounds of the struggle behind her, but she didn't dare look back. She trusted Ethan to handle it, but the fear was overwhelming. The mark on her arm burned, as if warning her that she could never truly escape. Finally, she reached the edge of the clearing where Ethan had told her to wait. She collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath, her body trembling from the adrenaline. The storm continued to rage around her, but she felt a strange sense of calm. Ethan had kept his promise. He had protected her. Minutes later, Ethan emerged from the trees, his face grim but unharmed. He carried the ancient book in one hand, his rifle slung over his shoulder. When he saw Lila, his expression softened, and he knelt beside her.
Are you okay?
Lila nodded, though her eyes were filled with tears.
I thought they had you.
I told you I wouldn't let anything happen to you.
Their eyes met, and for a moment the storm and the danger seemed to fade away. Lila felt a warmth in her chest, a feeling she hadn't known in a long time. She leaned into his touch, her heart swelling with gratitude and something more, something she couldn't quite name. Ethan's hand lingered on her cheek for a moment before he pulled away, his expression serious once more.
We need to get out of here. They'll regroup, and we need to be ready.
What about the book? Can it help us?
Ethan looked down at the ancient tome, his jaw tightening.
I hope so. But we need to figure out how to use it, and fast.
As they disappeared into the forest, the storm continued to rage, but the bond between them grew stronger. Together, they faced the darkness, their connection a beacon of hope in the chaos. Ethan and Lila ran through the forest, the ancient book firmly in his hands. The storm still raged around them, but the immediate danger of the cultists seemed to have been left behind, at least for now. Lila could barely breathe, her legs trembling, but she remained steady, trusting Ethan to guide her. He, on the other hand, seemed tireless, his eyes fixed on the path ahead, his determination unshakable. After hours of fleeing, they found shelter in a hidden cave, far enough away that the cultists wouldn't easily find them. Ethan lit a small fire, and the warmth of the flames brought some comfort to the two of them. Lila sat near the fire, still shaking, while Ethan examined the ancient book.
What do you think we can do with this?
Ethan flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the strange symbols and words in a language he didn't recognize.
We need to find a way to break the curse. If this book is the source of their power, maybe it's also the key to destroying them.
What if it doesn't work? What if they find us before we can do anything?
Ethan closed the book and looked at her, his expression serious but gentle.
Let's not think about that now. We need to focus on what we can do.
As the night wore on, Ethan continued to study the book while Lila tried to rest. She glanced at him occasionally, admiring his dedication and strength. There was something about him that drew her in, something that went beyond gratitude for him saving her. She felt that somehow he understood her pain, her struggle. Finally, Ethan found something, a reversal ritual described in the final pages of the book. He read the instructions in a low voice, his deep tone echoing in the cave.
We need a personal item from the person who cast the curse, and pure blood to nullify the pact.
Pure blood? What does that mean?
It means the blood of someone who hasn't been corrupted by the darkness. Someone whose soul is still intact.
Lila looked at him, confused.
But who? Both of us are involved in this now.
Ethan didn't answer immediately. He stared into the fire, his eyes distant, as if reliving painful memories. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and heavy with emotion.
There's something you need to know about me, Leela. Something I've never told anyone.
She leaned forward, her eyes filled with curiosity and concern.
What is it?
Ethan took a deep breath, as if preparing to carry a heavy burden.
I'm not just a hermit who ran away from the world. I was a pastor, Leela. I had a wife and a daughter. But a few years ago, something terrible happened. My wife died during childbirth, and my daughter, she disappeared. I searched for her for years, but I never found her. Since then, I've been running, trying to escape the guilt, the pain. But now I see that I can't run forever.
Leela was silent, her heart aching for him. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of pain and determination.
I can't change the past, Leela, but I can make sure the same thing doesn't happen to you. I won't let them destroy you.
She reached out, holding his hand.
You're not alone in this. We'll face them together.
Ethan smiled faintly, but there was sadness in his eyes.
There's something else you need to know, the ritual. It requires a sacrifice. Someone with a pure soul must offer themselves to break the curse.
What are you saying?
I'm the only one here who can do this. My soul, it's still pure, Lila. I've never given in to the darkness, no matter how much I've suffered. I can break the curse, but it will cost me my life.
Leela shook her head, tears streaming down her face.
No, we can't lose you. There has to be another way.
Ethan placed his hands on her shoulders, his voice soft but firm.
Leela, you're strong. You've survived all of this, and you'll keep surviving. But I've already lost everything I loved. If I can save you, if I can make sure you live, then it's worth it.
She tried to protest, but the words wouldn't come. She knew he was right, but the pain of losing him was unbearable. Ethan hugged her, holding her tightly, as if trying to memorize the moment.
You're not alone, Leela. You never will be.
When he pulled away, his eyes were filled with quiet determination. He picked up the book and began preparing the ritual, his hands steady despite the weight of his decision. Lila watched helplessly as he drew the symbols on the cave floor, his voice reciting the ancient words. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the cave, interrupting the ritual.
Stop.
Ethan and Lila turned, startled. A man dressed in the black robes of the cult stood at the entrance of the cave, his face hidden by a hood. He raised his hands, showing he was unarmed.
I'm not here to fight. I'm here to redeem myself. I know what you're trying to do, and I can help you, but you need to listen to me.
Lila looked at Ethan, her eyes filled with doubt.
Ethan, what's going on?
The man lowered his hood, revealing a face marked by guilt and regret.
I was one of them, but I don't want to be part of it anymore. I know where your daughter is, Ethan.
Ethan froze, his heart pounding.
My daughter? What are you talking about?
The man looked at him, his eyes filled with tears.
She was saved by a miracle. The cult took her, but she escaped. She is alive, Ethan, and she is looking for you.
Ethan felt his legs weaken, his mind spinning with the possibility.
Where is she? Where's my daughter?
The man shook his head.
I don't know exactly, but I know she's in a shelter for orphan children. She's safe.
Lila looked at Ethan, her eyes filled with hope.
Ethan, this is incredible. We can find her.
But before Ethan could respond, the man moved quickly, snatching the book from his hands.
I can't let you complete the ritual. The curse can't be broken this way.
Ethan tried to reach for him, but the man disappeared into the darkness of the cave, his words echoing behind him. Lila suddenly collapsed to the ground, her body shaking violently. Ethan rushed to her, holding her in his arms.
Leela, what's happening?
She didn't respond, her eyes closed, her hands clutching her arm where the black marks were beginning to fade. Ethan looked at the marks, his mind racing. The ritual had been interrupted, but something was happening. Suddenly, a tremor shook the cave, rocks beginning to fall from the ceiling. Ethan looked around, realizing they were in danger. He lifted Lila into his arms, his determination renewed.
We need to get out of here.
He ran toward the cave entrance, holding Lila tightly. Rocks fell around them, but he didn't stop, his mind focused only on saving her. When they finally emerged from the cave, the tremor stopped, and the quiet night enveloped them. Ethan laid Lila on the ground, checking to see if she was okay. She opened her eyes slowly, her breathing heavy.
Ethan, what happened?
You're okay. The marks. They're fading.
Lila looked at her arm, tears falling.
I'm free?
Yes, you're free.
They sat there for a moment, catching their breath. Finally, Lila looked at Ethan, her eyes filled with determination.
We need to find your daughter, Ethan. We need to go to her.
I don't know where to start.
I do. I wrote an article about paranormal phenomena at a shelter for orphaned children. I saw a photo of a little girl who looked just like you.
Ethan looked at her, his heart pounding.
You think it could be her?
I think so.
Ethan hugged Lila, his tears flowing freely.
Thank you, Leela. Thank you for giving me hope.
Days later, they stood in front of the orphanage, the sun shining on their faces. Lila looked at Ethan, her voice soft.
Are you ready?
Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes filled with a mix of joy and despair.
Yes, I'm ready.
They walked into the orphanage, their hands intertwined, ready to face the future together.